Today, we're going to be learning about the Spartacus League and one of its founders, Rosa Luxemburg. We'll be covering the history, ideas, and applications of the league and its leaders. As always, with my kickoffs, this entire presentation was made without the use of generative AI. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy. Okay, so who are these folks again? So the Spartacus League, or the Spartacus Bund, was a revolutionary socialist organization that was founded in Germany in 1914, led by Rosa Luxemburg, Karl Liebknecht, and Clara Zetkin, along with others, in opposition to the reformist turn that the German Social Democratic Party had taken, as well as the SDP's support of Germany's involvement in the First World War. The name of the organization itself was drawn from history. During the era of the Roman Republic, a Thracian gladiator named Spartacus was the leader of a massive slave revolt called the Third Servile War, also known as the War of Spartacus. While this war was ultimately won by the Roman Republic, the strength of the ex-slave forces was enough that it caused great fear in the Roman Senate, especially as Spartacus's forces won scores of victories against the technically stronger Roman army. One could argue that Rosa and her comrades were greatly inspired by the bravery of the ancients in choosing this name. Also, their flag rocks. Now for the founders themselves. Rosa Luxemburg, first and foremost, was born in Poland, but later became a German citizen and a member of the SDP, particularly its revolutionary wing, which would eventually break from it and under her leadership become the Spartacus League. Among her works are Reformer Revolution and The Mass Strike, the first of which I have read. Reformer Revolution was primarily a challenge to the revisionist theories of Edward Bernstein and argued for the mass strike and general strike, or mass strike / general strike, being the most valuable revolutionary tactic, which the SDP leadership did not like at the time. Karl Liebknecht was a German revolutionary socialist and member of the SPD, later breaking with it to help create the Spartacus League along with Rosa. He wrote a book called The Future Belongs to the People, which I have not read. His interest was primarily political agitation, and he was not a theorist per se, and seemed to have some weird ideas. Nevertheless, he was a valued and influential member in the organizations he helped found. And fun fact, his godparents were Marx and Engels themselves. Last but not least, Clara Zetkin was a German revolutionary socialist and women's rights advocate, and also a member of the SDP and later the third founder of the Spartacus League, along with Luxemburg and Liebknecht. Among her works is Fighting Fascism, How to Struggle, and How to Win, which I have read. She and Rosa were close friends, and she would later work with Lenin himself to help progress women's liberation in the Soviet Union, which unfortunately would be walked back once Stalin came to power. All right, we're going to go through this pretty quickly. So, revolutionary history, speedrun 90%. The sequence of events that would lead to the founding of the Spartacus League began pretty much when the SDP voted to support the war, abandoning internationalism, class struggle, and anti-militarism, which were crucial points that they had adhered to rigidly before this. And right after this vote, I'm talking like literally on the evening after the vote, Rosa invited other opponents of the war to her apartment, and it was there that the Spartacus League, initially called the International Group, would be formed. There's a long series of events that leads to the naming of the Spartacus League itself, but for now it's called the International Group. They worked against the SPD while still technically being in it, slowly distancing themselves further from the moderate leadership. It expanded the International Group expanded throughout the German Empire as well. Rosa wrote a program from prison from which the group adopted its first starting principles. It was here that the first mentions of Spartacus were written by her. This was when the name was changed to the Spartacus Group, still not the League yet. The SPD internally split again. A lot of stuff happened. The war continued, and they supported the Russian Revolution for a time. By the end of the war, the group organized an illegal conference where they proclaimed another revolutionary and anti-imperialist program, which they adopted. When the November Revolution began, lots of spontaneous workers and soldiers' councils took on the program of the Spartacus Group during the uprisings. Rosa's theories about the spontaneity of revolutionary action were proving correct in this moment, and it was also in this moment that, at Liebknecht's initiative, the organization was officially refounded as the Spartacus League itself, finally, fully splitting from this SPD with a higher focus on organization and a list of demands written by Rosa herself. So what did they demand? A lot. A lot. Rosa presents three groups of demands from the Spartacus League: 8 demands as immediate measures to protect the revolution, 8 more demands in the political and social realm, and 8 final demands that are immediate economic demands. I will run through these very quickly. Quote, in order to enable the proletariat to fulfill these tasks, the Spartacus League demands, number 1, as immediate measures to protect the revolution, disarmament of the entire police force and of all officers and non-proletarian soldiers, disarmament of all members of the ruling classes, confiscation of all weapons and munition stocks as well as armaments factories by workers and soldiers' councils, the arming of the entire adult male proletarian population as a workers' militia, creation of a Red Guard of proletarians as an active part of the militia for the constant protection of the revolution against counter-revolutionary attacks and subversions, abolition of the command authority of officers and non-commissioned officers, replacement of the military cadaver discipline by voluntary discipline of the soldiers, election of all officers by their units with right of immediate recall at any time, abolition of the system of military justice, expulsion of officers and capitulationists from all soldiers' councils, replacement of all political organs and authorities of the former regime by delegates of the workers and soldiers' councils, establishment of a revolutionary tribunal to try the chief criminals responsible for starting and prolonging the war, the Hohenzollerns, Ludendorff, Hindenburg, Tirpitz, and their accomplices, together with all the conspirators of counter-revolution. Immediate confiscation of all foodstuffs to secure the feeding of the people. 2. In the political and social realm, abolition of all principalities, establishment of a united German Socialist Republic, elimination of all parliaments and municipal councils and takeover of their functions by workers and soldiers' councils and of the latter's committees and organs. Election of workers' councils in all Germany by the entire adult working population of both sexes in the city and the countryside by enterprises as well as of soldiers' councils by the troops, officers and capitulationists excluded. The right of workers and soldiers to recall their representatives at any time. Election of delegates of the workers and soldiers' councils in the entire country to the Central Council of the Workers and Soldiers' Councils, which is to elect the Executive Council as the highest organ of the legislative and executive power. Meetings of the Central Council provisionally at least every 3 months with new elections of delegates each time in order to maintain constant control over the activity of the Executive Council and to create an active identification between the masses of workers and soldiers' councils in the nation and the highest governmental organ. Right of immediate recall by the local workers and soldiers' councils and replacement of their representatives in the Central Council should these not act in the interests of their constituents. Right of the Executive Council to appoint and dismiss the people's commissioners as well as the central national authorities and officials. Abolition of all differences of rank, all orders and titles, complete legal and social equality of the sexes. Radical social legislation, shortening of the labor day to control unemployment and in consideration of the physical exhaustion of the working class by the World War. Maximum working day of 6 hours. Immediate basic transformation of the food, housing, health, and educational systems in the spirit and meaning of the proletariat revolution. 3. Immediate economic demands. Confiscation of all dynastic wealth and income for the collectivity. Repudiation of the state and other public debt together with all war loans, with the exception of sums of certain level to be determined by the Central Council of the Workers and Soldiers' Councils. Expropriation of the lands and fields of all large and medium agricultural enterprises, formation of socialist agricultural collectives under unified central direction in the entire nation. Small peasant holdings remain in the possession of their occupants until the latter's voluntary association with the socialist collectives. Expropriation by the Council Republic of all banks, mines, smelters, together with all large enterprises of industry and commerce. Confiscation of all wealth above a level to be determined by the Central Council. Takeover of the entire public transportation system by the Council's Republic. Election of enterprise councils in all enterprises, which, in coordination with the workers' councils, have the task of ordering the internal affairs of the enterprises, regulating working conditions, controlling production, and finally taking over direction of the enterprise. Establishment of a central strike commission, which, in constant collaboration with the enterprise councils, will furnish the strike movement now beginning throughout the nation with a unified leadership, socialist direction, and the strongest support by the political power of the workers' and soldiers' councils. End quote. Okay, so that was a lot. But what does this all mean? What did the Spartacus League actually want? Well, by looking at their demands, the program they came in, and the actions taken by them, we get a pretty clear idea of what they actually want. Look at my notes real quick. Okay. So, and I'm quoting from the program itself that was part of the reading for tonight. Um, Among other things, quote, this transformation and this overthrow cannot be decreed by any bureau, committee, or parliament. It can be begun and carried out only by the masses of people themselves. Rosa emphasizes how you cannot reform your way into socialism. You have to fight for it. The autonomy of the masses is highlighted consistently throughout the program. Quote, the proletarian mass must therefore replace the inherited organs of bourgeois class rule with workers' and soldiers' councils, end quote. Rosa emphasizes the need for Soviets at every level, top to bottom. Quote, only through constant, vital, reciprocal contact between the masses of people and their organs, the workers' and soldiers' councils, can the activity of the people fill the state with a socialist spirit. End quote. Consistent communication and accountability is paramount in the socialist society. Quote, the highest idealism in the interest of the collectivity, the strictest self-discipline, the truest public spirit of the masses are the moral foundations of a social society, just as stupidity, egotism, and corruption are the moral foundations of capitalist society, end quote. Dispelling the notion that everyone would be just lazy and saying the truth about capitalism itself. Again, repeated important emphasis on bottom-up revolution of the masses. Quote, the emancipation of the working class must be the work of the working class itself, end quote. Quote, the proletarian revolution requires no terror for its aims. It hates and despises killing. It does not need these weapons because it does not combat individuals but institutions, end quote. Similar to Trotsky's views on adventurism, Rosa argues that the revolution will not succeed by simply killing the enemy one-on-one in targeted attacks. That being said, Rosa then goes on to state that the revolution is, quote, at the same time a death knell for all servitude and oppression, end quote. It is explained at length the absolute unwillingness of the capitalist class to ever give up a shred of their power and hegemony for socialist freedom, the will of the people be damned, and thus organization and action against the enemy, violent action included, is not only necessary but vital to the success of the overthrow of the capitalist model. Quote, against the attacks, insinuations, and rumors of the bourgeoisie must stand the inflexible clarity of purpose, vigilance, and ever-ready activity of the proletarian mass. End quote, a summation of the point above. Rosa compares the combined strength of the revolutionary masses to the hammer of Thor, using it to smash the head of the ruling classes. That alone is democracy. That alone is not the betrayal of the people, end quote. Rosa also calls for unification with other revolutionary socialist organizations and other nations to further the international proletarian revolution. She decries those who decry the Spartacus League and its aims, calling it, quote, the socialist conscience of the revolution, end quote, and, quote, the heart of the revolution beats within the Spartacus League, that the future belongs to it, end quote. As mentioned, so the STB did not like any of this. None of this was what they wanted at all. As mentioned before, the Spartacus League was primarily formed to counteract the reformist and pro-imperialist war current that was taking charge in the SDP, the bureaucrats and opportunists dedicated to staying in the status quo's good graces. Influence was divided between the reformist and revolutionary sects in the party. Rosa, Karl, Clara, and other several revolutionaries were increasingly sidelined until they formed the Spartacus League in opposition. Excuse me. Excuse me again. These divisions would only deepen as the November Revolution, aka the German Revolution of 1918 to 1919, began. Friedrich Ebert, the new head of the SDP, was designated the chancellor of the provisional government. His companion declared a German republic, while Liebknecht declared a free socialist republic of Germany. After the November Revolution, the Spartacus League was transformed into the Communist Party of Germany, and after significant debate, including Rosa herself voting that they should participate in the elections that were scheduled to take place, she was unfortunately overruled. Not long after that, a brief battle took place between the Socialist Revolutionaries and the Provisional Government forces, and the Spartacist uprising was initiated. From January 5th to January 12th of 1919, also called Bloody Week, a fierce bloody struggle erupted. Mass demonstrations and a general strike drew massive support, but the division amongst the leadership of whether or not to enact a violent insurrection or negotiate with Ebert's provisional government were ongoing and halted progress. Negotiations were tried, failed, and Ebert essentially sicked the Freikorps on the revolutionaries and created a military occupation in Berlin, which saw extreme violence acted by the right-wing forces on the leftists. By this point, the Spartacus uprising had been defeated thanks to the SDP-led provisional government and the Freikorps. Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht were murdered by the Freikorps at the behest of Gustav Nosk, an SPD guy who worked with the Freikorps a lot when it came to persecuting and killing communists, and Ebert himself, the leader at the time, who orchestrated the murder itself. May their names be damned by history forever for their monstrous acts. This would lead to the creation of the Weimar Republic, the weak, unstable parliamentary government that would not last long and eventually give way to the rise of the Nazis and become the Third Reich. Without Luxemburg and Liebknecht, leadership of the KPD would transfer to Paul Levi and his moderate reformist attitude. This didn't last long, and the KPD was then taken over by Ernst Thälmann, who would adopt a Stalinist line and was subsumed into Stalin's Comintern. When Hitler came to power, the KPD was banned and its members were forced underground and into exile in the Soviet Union. Stalin himself purged the remaining leadership of the KPD, and after the war, it was made into the government of the German Democratic Republic. We all know the rest of the history from there. So, how are Luxemburg and the ideas of the Spartacus League relevant to our current struggle? Well, we can see parallels between the past and the present. Firstly, mass militant action is proven to bring people together, even during the quarantine and isolation of the COVID times in our era. Frustrations with being forced to work during a pandemic created a situation by which revolutionary ideas take hold and lead to mass actions. Secondly, like Rosa Luxemburg and the Spartacus League, we are up against a formidable power structure, one that is losing control, but absolutely will not go down without the fight to end all fights. When it is time for revolutionary action, we must be organized, agitated, and educated enough to support the people as bring our force to bear against our enemy. All the crises that exist are connected, just as they were in the 1920s, and they can only be solved by the forcible transition of revolt. Thirdly, advocating for reforms does not mean giving up on revolutions. We can do both and make it clear that all the reformist demands can be fulfilled by seizing the wealth of the capitalist class, who are already maliciously mishandling this wealth and the crises that they themselves caused and profit from. Regardless of who's in charge of the capitalist system now or in the future, the crises will continue and the contradictions will sharpen, thus the necessity for revolution. The capitalist class will risk the end of the world to hold on to power, which means that revolution is the only path forward. They cannot be compromised with. When the time comes, we must be decisive. We must fight to win, because if we fail, it's game over for humanity. Socialism or barbarism is the final conflict of our time, and it is fast approaching. We must be prepared. We must engage in our work with dedication and determination to spread the ideas of our movement and then move with the masses towards the final victory. So that is the story of the Spartacus League and what we can learn from them. I want to end this presentation by highlighting Rosa's ending words from her pamphlet describing the demands of the organization. We as communists are often fond of the famous saying from Karl Marx that concluded the Communist Manifesto. Quote, "Let the ruling classes tremble at a communistic revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries unite." End quote. It's a good saying, one that is self-evidently powerful. I would posit, however, that Rosa's quote displayed here is not only just as powerful, but may even be more so, especially given our current situation. It promises bolder action and, importantly, a prospect that we have already touched on, that the final conflict is just that, a conflict, a war for the fate of this world. Quote, "Proletarian, arise! To the struggle! There is a world to win and a world to defeat. In this final class struggle in world history for the highest aims of humanity, our slogan toward the enemy is thumb on the eyeballs and knee in the chest." Thank you for watching, comrades. I hope this has been informative, and I look forward to a very lively discussion.